we have a special guest that has prepared for us. So welcome everyone. For this week, we're going to talk about governance scope again, because we need to cover twice. So this is the second time. Some of the topics might overlap, and maybe it's also possible that the discussion will end soon. But yeah, I think that maybe we can start with discussion and then also presentation by Patrick. I have asked him about not just about the governance scope, but also especially like how, for example, advisors might be able to help him, and then the scope as well. So that's I know that we cannot do a round of applause, but yeah, let's welcome him. So yes, the floor is yours.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And thanks for asking me to come and chat today. I'm just going to share my screen. Let's check that's the right screen. It is. Oh, let me do this. Okay, so thank you for inviting me, Do. So what we're going to do is we're going to chat through some different areas of the governance scope. So that the things that Do particularly highlighted that he wanted me to cover were kind of the pain points of the governance scope that we've encountered so far, but also like to cover a bit about the advisory council and who I thought would be what would make a good candidate for the advisory council. So it's not a particularly long presentation, but hopefully it'll provide some areas of discussion for the rest of the call. So what is the governance scope, right? The governance scope kind of at the moment has four main roles that I have identified. So it regulates the balance of power. So both with the atlas and feeding into the governance scope, there are a number of rules around how governance in the endgame is supposed to work, and that applies to both the pre-game and the endgame proper. And the governance scope is where most of those rules are actually codified and put into practical terms. So, for example, the restrictions on delegates being anonymous contributors and how that should work, it really should all be within the governance scope. It also adjudicates on appeals processes related to misalignment. So we haven't really had to do this yet, but if you look in the governance scope, there's a section on scope appeals. So that can be referenced by ABC members specifically are able to request the governance facilitators to adjudicate on a scope appeal. So that would be maybe someone has submitted a scope amendment that you do or RAF think is not in keeping with the atlas. You could then appeal to GovAlpha to ask us to make a ruling on that, and we have some discretion here. We can either make an interpretation ourselves, or we can elevate the discussion to MKR voters directly. So there's a couple of ways that works. Like I said, we haven't had to use it yet, but it's there. We also then manage ABC membership. So we're responsible for checking that the ABC members have kind of signed all the appropriate things from their wallets to make sure that we can recognize them. We actively record them, and we also are responsible for any issues that may arise from their kind of internal governance processes. There is some overlap here with the support scope, and we've been working quite closely together with them to kind of manage this area of things. And then finally, we manage the aligned delegate recognition and compensation. So again, we're responsible for making sure that aligned delegates have kind of followed all of the steps they're supposed to in order to become recognized as an aligned delegate, and also for making sure they continue to follow the rules. We're also responsible for monitoring their contributions, making sure we're watching their votes, seeing how many of these meetings they attend to, which is why you quite often see me popping in here to check attendance, making sure they've been communicating their votes, and then finally calculating their compensation at the end of the month. So we've got some different bits and pieces there. There's also some other things in the governance scope that kind of a more minor thing. So it kind of defines who is the responsible facilitator of each scope. So you've got the basically it's us for governance, and then you have SES for protocol support and stability, and growth for accessibility. Although that might switch to SES in the next round of edits that Rune submitted. And then it also defines budgets for those facilitators as well. Sorry, 1 second. Okay, so how does it work at the moment? So we've got the governance group that's managed by GovAlpha as the responsible facilitator, and that's defined in how that works. Is that basically anywhere that you see references to like facilitator DAOs in either the atlas or the scopes of the governance scope, basically it's GovAlpha's job to be doing that as much as we can at the moment. Now, obviously, there's some areas where maybe you're referencing technology that hasn't been developed yet. We can't do that, but we will. But anywhere that says, facilitator DAO should do this, basically in your head, read GovAlpha should do this. And if we're not doing that, then we should be. Now, principally, like I said, we haven't really done much adjudicating. We haven't done much interpretation. The main things have been managing the aligned delegates and the AVCs, as well as doing our other roles. But we have kind of run into a few different areas where we think there are some pain points that we can kind of briefly go over here. Some of you might remember that we've already kind of submitted some areas that we thought could be improved in the scope and submitted them to a vote, which was approved, although some of them were then subsequently overwritten by new amendments. So we are actively trying to fix some of these pain points as well. So how it work in the future. So let's fast forward a year. Endgame's launched. GovAlpha's been offboarded. We've got the new tokens, we've got the new stablecoin, we've got the new governance token, all of the infras in place. You'll have multiple facilitator DAOs, and the idea behind a facilitator DAO is basically they are responsible for running the governance processes of Maker, both core and sub-DAO governance. So you'll have different facilitator sub-DAOs that are responsible for different areas of the protocol. So you might have one that's focusing on support scope, and then you might have one that's focusing on managing 2 or 3 different sub-DAOs governance processes. But every single facilitator DAO, regardless of the other stuff they're doing, they're all responsible for the governance scope. It all gets tied together. And this is where all of those actions are supposed to be aligned. So they will also have responsibility for DAO governance processes. So kind of like now how GovAlpha, so like let's say tech ops wanted a poll to be run, and GovAlpha would be responsible for actually actioning that. It'd be kind of similar with the facilitator DAO. So let's say Spark has a governance process they want to happen, or someone in Spark wants to do something. The facilitator DAO will actually be responsible for both running that process, but also then actioning it. So you'll have it would be the facilitator DAO's job to then like seek out vendors who are going to actually action the work. So let's say we want code to add a new collateral type or a new vault type for one of the allocator DAOs, then you might have the facilitator DAO would be the ones that will be contracting DWIS to actually perform that work and submit it into a main spell. So there's very much going to be an operations slant to how they're going to work, which is much stronger than what we do now. Like we kind of do that. We kind of run operations with execs, but it'll be a much more explicit process for the facilitator DAOs, and the facilitator DAOs will be like actively responsible for that. To kind of go along with all this stuff, you're going to have much stronger alignment incentives for the facilitator DAOs compared to what GovAlpha gets today. We're going to have, it's going to be competitive. So you're going to have, if you're doing these scopes, you get paid X amount more than if you only do these scopes. So there's going to be much stronger like alignment incentives in place for those facilitator DAOs, which is kind of cool. And you're also going to have strong penalties for acting in a misaligned fashion. And that's something that MakerDAO has kind of struggled with from since the move to the DAO structure from the foundation is that it's really easy to give people money. It's really difficult to penalize people who maybe are acting in misaligned ways. So that it's going to be a much more complex system, but it's also going to be more robust. So you're going to have checks and balances more. You're going to have multiple of these facilitated DAOs. You're going to have multiple GovAlphas running around trying to do everything. And it's also likely that facilitated DAOs at some point are going to all have to become anons. So in the way the Atlas is worded at the moment, it says are encouraged. But I believe that future amendments will make that requirement similar to how delegates are required to be anonymous today. So what are the pain points? This is where I got to vent a bit. So you've got some areas that are kind of listed in the Atlas as things that the governance scope should include and should be doing, and then they're not actually defined in the governance scope. So the ones I picked out are like Gov 9, Gov 10, and Gov 11. So those are things like related to kind of the interactions between ADCs, ADs, facilitated DAOs, core governance security, and sub-DAO governance security. I'm sure these things will come, but it's just to highlight that the scope isn't complete, and that's because we're still in pre-game and we're still waiting on further developments to happen that we can then make the system complete. But it does make it difficult. So if you've got a document that's changing all the time, rules are changing, it isn't easy to then set expectations. So if a delegate, say, has questions about how they should be acting, and then the answer might change from one week to the next based on the latest amendments. This should be limited to pre-game, but we've just seen an example of this where, we had all the new delegates contracts get spun up. People spent gas to spin up 2 delegate contracts. They were active for a month and a half and then were offboarded. So like these kind of things that are definite pain points that we're seeing, but hopefully as we further develop the scopes and further develop the Atlas, these things will become less painful, and we'll have a much greater understanding of how things are supposed to work. So other pain points. So at the moment, we have to kind of manually track and maintain lists of ABC members and delegates, which is that takes up a lot of our time, and time is money, and we have to pay people for doing this work. So this can get quite expensive. We're in the way that the delegate system is set up. We currently have the community repo on GitHub, which is the source of truth, which is managed by GovAlpha. And then the voting portal, which is managed by Dux, reads that repo. And then, so basically, to become a delegate that's live on the portal as an aligned delegate, GovAlpha need to enter it into the community repo. That gets fed through to Dux's repo, and then it gets pushed to the voting portal. So that means we have to record all of the delegates in 2 different places. Once in the community repo to feed it to Dux, once in the MIPS repo, because they're all supposed to be recorded on the MIPS portal. So that's 2 different repos, and also in different formats on both of those repos. And also assign maybe Discord roles and forum roles and these things. So all of these things just take time, and you have to double check everything to make sure that the addresses are all correct. And this is just one example of something that takes up a lot of our time doing it manually. Other things will be manually tracking voting participation, manually tracking who's attending calls, who's attending text chats, manually tracking have people been communicating. This is tens of hours a month, if not more, of time that there's probably ways to automate. And hopefully, Dux are working on some really cool stuff, which would be, I don't want to go into too many details because it's not yet public information, but ideally in the end game proper, a lot of this stuff will be doable on chain, which will mean that we're no longer reliant on kind of recording things in multiple GitHub repos and stuff. And so that could be super cool. But that is a big pain point for us. It's just the time it's taken us to do a lot of this stuff. Moving on. So So we talked about it being incomplete, but also what is documented is sometimes not particularly clear. It can be quite ambiguous. So you've got language that can be interpreted in multiple ways and will doubtless be interpreted by different individuals based on what's suitable for their personal circumstances. And just to answer the point in chat from Harmony, yes, you're quite right. Once the Sagittarius engine is launched, there will be a new delegate election season, which will require people to launch new contracts. And what I don't know at the moment is whether the delegate contract factory is going to change as well, which is the contract you all interact with to make your delegate contracts. That's called the factory contract. I don't know whether that's going to change or whether it's just we're going to make new ones. But I'm sure Dux will be on top of that at the moment. Is there we'll come back to these questions at the end. I just wanted to do the Harmonies one just because it was timely. So an example would be like, when we're looking at whether someone's identity has been revealed, what does revealed mean? Is that revealed publicly? Is it revealed privately to a facilitator? Is it just, that someone somewhere knows what someone's identity is, without being able to prove it? These are things that have already come up. So we've had people come to us and say, hey, we think this person should be de-recognized because of this. And then we're left to say, well, actually, it's not revealed. You can't tell us who it is. So these are ambiguities that, could be avoided by using kind of different language, making it simpler, making it more specific. Similarly, like what is strong suspicion? So, I can suspect someone's identity, but is that a strong suspicion? Is it a weak suspicion? Is it a moderate suspicion? So like we would like to see some of this stuff tightened up and kind of clarified to make it easier to do our jobs, because at the end of the day, we're the people that are responsible for this. But when you're talking about things like delegate identities, this is significant sums of money that are involved here. These are you can be getting 5 figures of DAI worth of MKR a month, so these impact people's lives if we're making incorrect decisions based on incomplete information. And then stuff like in the latest round of edits, we had the introduction of the AD buffers, which is a new system of payments that as written strongly suggest that it should be like a DSS Best like streaming system for payments, with some added complications, whereas practically speaking, the only way we can really do it is by calculating it all manually off chain. So again, it's just adding, like, we've got stuff that's clearly intended to be like, done automatically that we're having to do manually, and it just adds time and expense to everything. But we'll see how we come on with developing ways to deal with that. So then moving on, I kind of covered the governance scope briefly there, or less briefly than I thought I would. So talk about advisory council membership and what makes a good candidate for an advisory council member for the governance scope. So maybe we should think about what the advisory council is supposed to do. So the advisory councils are groups of people, ecosystem actors, that are responsible for producing the aligned scope proposals, which are recommendations of edits to the different scopes, and are submitted on a regular basis. And the idea is that when the ABCs like yourselves have made your governance scope position documents for each scope for the quarter, those will then get sent to the advisory council, who will review the scope. So they'll look at the KISS one, they'll look at the growth one, they'll look at the risk one, they'll look at the sovereign finance one. And based on all of these things and their own interpretations, they don't have to follow them blindly. They will then produce these documents, these aligned scope proposals, that would then be submitted to make a governance for approval to alter the scopes where necessary. So it's quite a big job. It's not a lot of hours, but it's quite exactly. It's an important job because the scopes are the sets of rules that all of the subdials and the core are supposed to follow along with the atlas. This would be a good example of somewhere where a scope appeal might take place. So you might have an advisory council that has submitted an aligned scope proposal that the Growth CVC thinks is contradictory to the Atlas. So that would be a time where you might want to do the appeals process we were talking about earlier. So I kind of was having a think about this, like who would I want to be on this council? And this is kind of applicable to all of the scopes in my view, but particularly to the governance scope. So I've kind of identified 3 high-level criteria that I think would make someone a capable member of the governance advisory scope. So those would be, they understand DAO governance, not specifically Maker, but generally, because they might be able to bring expertise and opinions on things that are being done in other DAOs that might benefit Maker in the end game as well. But they should also understand how Maker governance and particularly the endgame structures work. So they should have a working knowledge of what a facilitated DAO is, what an allocated DAO is, the interface between the two, the interface between the core. It's very little point having someone on the governance council who doesn't understand these things. And then finally, would have a reasonable level of technical knowledge about how the Maker protocol works. So what is the surplus buffer? What is a flop auction? These kind of things I think are still very useful, even if we're not talking about technical stuff. You kind of need to know how the protocol works in order to kind of decide what works on a governance level, because you need to consider the interactions between governance and the technical side. But the problem is that finding these individuals is going to be very difficult. So this kind of, in a way, in a very, very small way, could remind someone of maybe Rune's stablecoin trilemma, where you kind of have to pick 2 of these 3 things when you're introducing candidates. But there are some people out there, and I'm happy to provide names of people who I think would be good for this. But the problem is, would they be willing to do it? Is the other thing. So, but yeah, so that's it for my slides. I've seen a couple of questions pop up in the chat, so I'm just going to scroll back up. So. And I'm going to stop sharing the screen. So True Name had asked, is there a current timeline on when the next season will start and Sagittarius engine will be launched? No. There are estimates. However, I think in the last few weeks, I've heard 4 different estimates for when things are going to launch. So I don't want to put a precise timeline on it. The hope, I think, is still this year, but beyond that, I'm not prepared to nail my colours to the mast just yet. This season will start at the time of the launch of the Sagittarius engine. So basically, it will need to go through an executive vote, as with any technical addition to the Maker protocol, and then once that happens, then the season will kick off with the new contracts and things. Raf said, commenting that this quarter was an additional hurdle because of the 12 to 5 scope change. Yes, I agree. It's been difficult for us as well. We are trying to be as kind of flexible as we can, within the spirit of the scopes and Atlas, in order to kind of make sure that we don't accidentally rug anyone in terms of compensation. And also, being flexible in terms of, the scope will say, like, well, you have to have meetings in these specific weeks, but if someone's already covered the support scope twice, they can maybe do the governance scope that week instead for this quarter, because it's all new. Jan Sky, that was more a question for the Growth ABC, so I will leave that and let them answer. And then OX Defensor asks, could we produce educational content to help them get them up to speed? Yes, we could. The problem, there's several problems here. So we already started doing that. Spent quite a lot of time doing that. We even have the website set up, which is endgame.makerdao.com, and then everything changed. So we've spent, possibly 100 hours worth of, time between, multiple different people, and then the next month, half of what you've written is out of date, and it's really easy to say, oh yeah, let's produce education, but it's actually really difficult to achieve in practice. We are still working on this stuff. It's taken a bit of a backseat because we're spending so much time working on other stuff. Like we commented, it's a lot of manual stuff we need to do. But it is something we're going to be revisiting. We've got people in the team now who previously had restricted hours due to other, not everyone in GovAlpha is full time. In fact, I'm the only one that's full time in GovAlpha. but people have now got more time than they maybe did a month or so ago. So we're going to try and get some updates done to that stuff that we've previously done. Like, you know, there was stuff as well. The growth team we're planning to work on some stuff. I don't know whatever happened to that. I don't know whether that got published or not. But yeah, that's kind of the main thing here. But we keep an eye on endgame.makerdao.com for updates there. And then Clokey is saying, so I need to translate the southern drawl in my head. March 2024. Okay, I see that's news to me. So it might not even be this year then for the launch of the Sagittarius engine. Okay. So I'm going to hand things back over to Rafan to drive the rest of the call.
Thanks a lot, Patrick. Just maybe one last question from my side is regarding advisory council members for governance scope. I was wondering if you think that people from outside of Maker could even be qualified, because like Maker Endgame is such a special animal. So I was wondering if you could even recommend that advisory council members are selected from outside, because I think especially like in DAO governance, it seems like Maker has always been like pretty far ahead of the pack, and now with Endgame it's just like totally different than any other DAO. So maybe there can be governance experts from like vastly different areas, like large NGOs or something, or maybe even governance or governance experts or political science experts. But what's your opinion there? Do you think, or have you seen people that you kind of look up to and think that they could be great members to an advisory council outside of Maker, or do you think we have to source from the inside?
So that's a great question. A couple of questions really. So in terms of like things like, you know, political science experts, NGO, maybe contributors, like sounds great in principle. Our experience is that these people are not cheap. We've kind of previously reached out to a few people from GovAlpha to try and get their input on Maker governance stuff. But they would also pretty much fail all three of these criteria that I think would be reasonable. You know, so if someone who's not even working in the DAO space at all, I think it's unlikely that someone working for an NGO is going to understand the end game or is going to understand Maker on a technical level. In terms of people outside Maker that could contribute, I gave a couple of names last week, but we can go over it again. I think what you could say is if someone is an outstanding candidate in the kind of the understanding DAO governance field, you know, they someone who you think is a great thinker on DAO governance, maybe very influential people, they could still contribute even if they maybe have less of an understanding of Maker. But you're right that, you know, Maker is a more complex beast from a governance perspective, and that's for several reasons. Partly because we're still working off legacy contracts that were developed kind of 6 years ago that we've never got around to updating. And that makes just even interacting with, you know, and voting in Maker governance more complex than many other DAOs experience. You know, the MKR token doesn't have a delegate function, so unlike many newer tokens where you can, you know, the token doesn't have to leave your wallet to delegate to someone. In Maker, you have to send it to a contract, then send it on to another contract, and that's you delegated. So that's much more complicated as well. But you know, people who I would maybe think would be who I look up to in governance. I gave two names last week. So one was Kevin Owocki from Gitcoin, and also Mark Zeller from Aave. So there's people who I kind of really enjoy reading their opinions on governance and what the work they've been doing. I have no idea whether they would be interested in this at all. I've never even spoken to either of them. But those are just examples of people that I think maybe who would come from outside Maker, maybe with less of the knowledge of Maker, but would maybe still be able to contribute. So, you know, just to be clear, I have not mentioned this to either of them. And then, but yeah, I think realistically, you're going to want, at least initially, people who have been involved in Maker previously. And that doesn't necessarily mean GovAlpha. You know, you could have people like Juan or Wouter from SES would be good candidates. experts as well. But there are, I think having at least a baseline knowledge of how Maker works would be very helpful for these people.
Definitely. Thanks, Patrick. I'm going to pass it over to June. Is there anything you want to cover? Oh yeah, Cloaky, thanks. Yeah, Mandible. That was recommended to me by Rafa, the mirror guy. That looks super promising, right? Like I think he got it up and started in like a day or two. So I'm gonna check it out, definitely. Thanks for taking a closer look there. There's one more question from Bona Publica to Patrick. Can you explain the mechanics behind aligned delegates neutral governance links and define broken links?
The short answer is no, I can't explain it because I haven't seen the technical documentation of how these things are going to work. So until we've got that, I can't really answer that question, I'm afraid.
Okay. Yeah, I think from my side, this is pretty clear. We're getting close to the end of this quarter, and so I think like from our side, we're gonna continue updating the doc that we shared also on the on the Discord channel, and then start producing the strategy.
I saw other ABCs having the advisor, so like there's other ABCs produce the position documents already. That's like good to be released, or because I know that some ABCs talk about it, but is there an example that I can look at, or we could? I mean, I know it should be different, but like, can I at least reference a bit? Thank you. Let's see, Jurex Defense or share the vigilance one. By the way, this is a more technical question, but so for like, especially because there's like CVC that was started recently, right? Like there's one for Latin America. Like, then do they have to basically cover the scopes like very, very fast to be able to be like, recognized, or how do they work? Because like there's some that were starting in the middle, like just kind of curious. I mean, it's not really related to us, but
I think that's an example, right, of what I was talking about, where we kind of have to interpret with the spirit of the scopes and the atlas rather than the actual, so like if someone hasn't had a chance to cover all of the scopes because they've only been an ABC for 3 weeks, it would seem unfair to penalize them for that. But the good thing about the way the incentives are structured for ABCs is that it's on a per scope basis. So if you've only got a few weeks, you can still get 2 meetings for one of the scopes done and a position document done, and you'll still earn funding, like your ABC compensation for that particular scope. So so that it's not a completely lost cause if you join halfway through a quarter.
all right, I see Honorable Publica sharing about the refi one, thank you, and then Vigilance sharing about the case. Thanks. But yeah, well, seems like the Rafa and I, we're gonna have lots of coffee together. I'm excited. My points are ready.
Yeah, totally. So like I think how many more meetings do we have this quarter? I think 2 more, right? Or 3? 3 till end of June. So I think we have to touch the support scope twice and then present our documents. Okay. Then there's no more points from my side, and thanks all.
Yeah. Anybody else has any questions? And once again, thank you, Patrick, for the enlightening presentation. I'm not sure whether like is it okay if you can share with us like a link or I mean you can give
For the
us
slides.
yes the slide.
Yeah, I'll drop them in the Growth ABC channel.
All right. Well, thank you so much. That would be greatly appreciated.
No problem.
All right. Seems like there were a lot of discussions on the chat. I can't follow them, but yeah, for the I think rest of the discussion, maybe we can continue on the Discord channel for Growth ABC. Is there any other topic that we should discuss, Rafael?
No, not this week. No, I think we're good.
Sounds good. Also, I sent some of the delegates want to like share with me for some of the ideas or presentation. I've been a little bit busy, but I'll promise you that I will go over the messages. So apology if I haven't responded yet. All right, sounds good. Then I think that we can close the floor for today, and everybody hopefully have a good week.